Good afternoon, and welcome to our TV show featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at mythsandrealities.com. Every year, Turkish-American youth from K-12 to college level are bombarded with baseless Armenian propaganda, deceptively calling the events of 1915 genocide, which is a long-discredited political claim. There are movies, documentaries, political resolutions, partisan articles by Armenian writers, newspaper editorials, billboards, demonstrations, and more. What does all that mean? Does that mean that they can replace the international law? Does that mean the fabricated Armenian evidence replace the historical truth in the archives? Of course not. The characterization of the 1915 events as genocide is a racist and dishonest interpretation of history. Racist because it deliberately ignores the enormous Turkish pain, suffering, and losses at the hands of Armenian revolutionaries. And dishonest because it dismisses Armenian revolts and terrorism since 1862, Armenian treason since 1877, Armenian territorial demand since early 19th century in areas where they were only a small minority, the vast Turkish suffering due to all of these factors, and wartime homeland security aspect of the TERESET, or Temporary Resettlement Order of 1915. For more information on numerous aspects of Turkish-Armenian relations, please see earlier episodes at mythsandrealities.com. In our episodes, we cover subjects from Armenian treason to Turkish suffering, from temporary resettlement to Smyrna fires, to show you deception, myths, and realities behind the Armenian claims. All this may sound like lots of videos to watch, but I will make it easy for you to understand the Turkish-Armenian relations in the next few minutes. Turks and Armenians lived in peaceful cohabitation in Anatolia for close to a millennium. Armenians, like other religious communities in the Ottoman Empire, namely Greeks, Jews, Assyrians, and others, were given the status of millet, which means nation in Turkish. The millets were free to govern their own community, run their own schools and churches in their own language and customs, collect taxes, and resolve legal disputes. They would pay annual taxes to the Ottoman government and would be free from military service. This allowed them to concentrate on trade, arts, and crafts, which made them prosperous and rich. This system was a far cry from those of the European nations where kingdoms and empires would rule with an iron hand and persecute minorities at will. Religious freedom was unheard of in Europe at the time. The Ottoman Empire was far ahead of the Western civilization in that respect. Things started changing in the 19th century with the design of major European powers like Britain, France, and Russia over the lands of the Ottoman Empire, which they all coveted. Spread of the notion of nationalism after the French Revolution led to several Balkan countries to secede from the Ottoman Empire. Some Armenians aspired to these Balkan nations, not understanding that those nations, like Romanians, Serbians, Bulgarians, and others, constituted a majority in their lands, whereas the Armenians were scattered over a wide geography and were a minority in that territory, wherever they lived. The arrival of the American Protestant missionaries in Ottoman lands since 1820s and their teachings of Christian superiority and nationalism caused the Turkish-Armenian relations to sour and even turn violent. Some missionaries in American schools are known to harbor known Armenian terrorists and even store Armenian weapons. Armenians now wanted more than autonomy. They wanted their own country, like the Serbians, the Romanians, and the Bulgarians and others, on vast Ottoman lands where Armenians were a minority. If they succeeded in their violent revolts, the Armenians would have established the first apartheid of the 20th century, where a small Christian minority would rule over a massive Muslim majority. Armenians resorted to terrorism, revolts, bombings, assassinations, mass killings, treason, and more to achieve their anti-democratic goals. Turks only defended their homeland against a treacherous group. When the Ottomans were in the vice in April of 1915 by the greatest Allied armada ever assembled, viciously attacking the Dardanelles in the west, and the brutal and cruel Russian army invading in the east, Ottoman Armenians, instead of helping their own government and their own state, chose to join the invading enemy armies. Armenians killed more than 80,000 Muslims in the city of Van and turned over the key to the city with great fanfare and drama to the invading Russian army general. What did Armenians expect from the Ottoman Empire for their heinous crimes? A pat on the shoulder? Is this how Armenians paid back their centuries-long peace, self-rule, and prosperity? How would the European powers or America react to backstabbing ingrates? How? It is educational to note that Turkey is the only country in the world that is criticized, defamed, and demonized for defending their own homeland. After all, the war was not fought in London or Paris or Moscow or Washington, D.C. It was fought in the Dardanelles, Sarıkamış, Adana, Maraş, Urfa, Mesopotamia, Palestine, Sinai, all Ottoman Turkish lands. When the Allies, except America, rained death and destruction upon Turks, and the Armenians heinously aided and abetted them, the invading enemies, what was expected of the Turks? To lie down and play dead, accept defeat, accept foreign rule? What? Anyone with the slightest knowledge of the 5,000-year-old Turkish culture and history knows that Turks do not accept invasions or foreign rule. They swiftly reorganize, innovate, and fight back until they win. That fighting spirit and inclusive nature of the Turkish character allowed Turks to establish numerous empires, the latest one, the Ottoman Empire, ruling for 623 years over 3 continents. Ignoring the Ottoman archives, the Turkish archives, the Turkish pain, suffering, and losses, and Western sources that dispute Armenian political claims of genocide out of prejudice, Islamophobia, and or anti-Turkish, will only delay reaching a mutually acceptable, fair, and honest narrative respectful of all sides. We already lost a century, and if the Armenian diaspora's racist and dishonest attitude continues, this debate will continue unabated for another century and beyond. Against this backdrop, let me lay the legal background for you. In 1948, the United Nations adopted the term genocide at its Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. On 9th of December 1948, the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crime and Genocide approved and proposed for ratification by General Assembly. Its entry into force after 3 years of intense debates and enough signatures collected, was on January 12, 1951. There are 19 articles, but the most important ones are the first 6, as the rest deal with languages, procedures, etc. Armenian writers conveniently quote and base their argument on the first 3. The Article 1, genocide is a crime under the international law. Article 2, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such, killing members of the group, or causing serious bodily or mental harm to its members, or deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, or imposing measures intended to prevent birth within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Article 3, the following acts shall be punishable: A, genocide; B, conspiracy to commit genocide; C, direct and public incitement to commit genocide; D, attempt to commit genocide; E, complicity in genocide. And the Armenians stop here and then say, see, by this definition, Turks committed a genocide. To which we Turks say, not so fast. You just quoted Articles 1, 2, and 3 and stopped. What about the Articles 4 through 9? When they're all included, the Armenian claims collapse under their own weight. Intent to destroy in Article 2 was never established. In fact, through 1916 Ottoman courts-martial and the 1919-1921 Malta Tribunal established just the opposite, that TERESET could not be genocide. Article 6 says persons charged with genocide or any of the other acts enumerated in Article 3 shall be tried by a competent tribunal of the state or by such international penal tribunal as may have jurisdiction. That was never done either. The Kanguru courts of occupied Istanbul in 1919-1920, the Armenians rely on as evidence was a political account settling among the Sultan and the Young Turks, where hearsay, forgeries, personal grudges, and newspaper clips were admitted to one-sided evidence, and the defendants could not hire lawyers or cross-examine the charges. Article 8 says, any contracting party may call upon the competent organs of the United Nations for the prevention and suppression of acts of genocide. Why did the Armenians not take their case to the International Court of Justice, which is established just for this purpose? Why wait for 100 years? We know why. Reason 1, if it goes to court, the Turkish side of the story will be heard by the entire world. And the Armenians will be branded backstabbing ingrates, traitors, and frauds. Whereas Armenians managed to keep the Turkish views and archives censored until today. So why take such a risk now? Armenians know well that their racist and dishonest arguments can win only in platforms where Turkish views are censored. That is why Turkish scholars are never invited to academic panels involving Turkish-Armenian relations. Can you imagine an academic panel discussing the US-Russia or US-China relations without studying Russian or Chinese archives, or inviting responsible opposing views from Russia or China? If this sounds absurd to you, welcome to the Turkish-Armenian relations. Western bias, anti-Turkism, Islamophobia, Christian solidarity with Christian Armenians are all rolled into one to erect a wall, disabling civilized dialogue between Turks and Armenians. So Armenians go after politicians to quickly declare one-sided victories of genocide, politicians who could not even point to Turkey on a world map. Finally, the Article 9 says disputes between the contracting parties relating to the interpretation application or fulfillment of the present convention, including those relating to the responsibility of a state for genocide, shall be submitted to the International Court of Justice at the request of any of the parties to the dispute. As one can see, if Armenia wanted, Armenia could go to ICJ anytime since 1951 and ask for their dispute with Turks to be sorted out. But Armenians cannot do that. They cannot do that because genocide is a law enacted in 1951 and it's not retroactive. No law is retroactive. Anyone with a basic understanding of law will have heard the famous Latin phrase, nullum crimen sine lege, meaning one cannot face criminal punishment except for an act that was criminalized by law before one committed that act. So the Armenian case would be thrown out of court because of this profound principle of law. The highest court in Europe, ECHR's Grand Chamber, ruled in 2015 that Armenian genocide is an opinion, not a court verdict. As such, it can be debated and rejected, and rejecting would be an exercise in free speech. Thus, it was determined at the highest level of law in Europe that refuting and disproving the Armenian genocide allegations was not a hate speech, as the deceptive Armenian lobby likes you to believe, but it was mere free speech. Furthermore, the court ruled that the alleged Armenian genocide could not be compared to the court-proven Jewish Holocaust. The latter had gone through legal scrutiny at a competent tribunal, and the intent was documented to be factual, intent to destroy. Remember the Nuremberg verdict of October 1st, 1946? Armenians never had a Nuremberg. Totally failing on the legal side, let's now look at the historical substantiation, or lack of it, of the Armenian claims. Turks can effortlessly show any disinterested third party with powerful archival documents that Armenians and their allies ignore the following. Armenians took up arms against their own government. Armenians incited many massive armed and bloody rebellions since 1862. Armenians aided and abetted the invading enemy armies. Armenians engaged in systematic intimidation and terrorism. Armenians deliberately and consistently exercised supreme treason. Armenians made arbitrary, baseless, and arrogant territorial claims in lands where they were only a minority. Armenians massacred hundreds of thousands of their own fellow Turkish and Muslim Ottoman citizens. And Armenians misrepresented a wartime homeland security measure involving a temporary resettlement program, or TERESET for short, triggered by the threat those Armenian fifth column activities posed to the Ottoman war effort as genocide to the unsuspecting world community. On May 19, 1985, 69 prominent historians published an open letter in New York Times and Washington Post. They said the following, I quote, "The undersigned American academicians who specialize in Turkish, Ottoman, and Middle Eastern studies are concerned that the current language embodied in House Joint Resolution 192 is misleading and or inaccurate in several respects. Supporting the concept of a national day of remembrance of men's inhumanity to men, we respectfully take exception to that portion of the text which singles out for special recognition the 1.5 million people of Armenian ancestry who were victims of genocide perpetrated in Turkey between 1915 and 1923. I continue to partially quote, "As for the charge of genocide, no signatory of this statement wishes to minimize the scope of Armenian suffering. We are likewise cognizant that it cannot be viewed as separate from the suffering experienced by the Muslim inhabitants of the region. The weight of evidence so far uncovered points in the direction of serious intercommunal warfare perpetrated by Muslim and Christian irregular forces, complicated by disease, famine, suffering and massacres in Anatolia and adjoining areas during the First World War. The resulting death toll among both Muslims and Christians of the region was immense. But much more remains to be discovered before historians will be able to sort out precisely responsibility between warring and innocent, and to identify the causes for the events which resulted in the death or removal of large numbers of Eastern Anatolian population, Christian and Muslim alike. Statesmen and politicians make history, and scholars write it. For this process to work, scholars must be given access to the written records of the statesmen and politicians of the past. We believe that proper position for the U.S. Congress to take on this is, and related issues of course, is to encourage full and open access to all historical archives and not to make charges on historical events before they are fully understood." Unquote. As the above comments illustrate, the history of the Ottoman Armenians is much debated among scholars, many of whom do not agree with the historical assumptions embodied in the wording of Armenian-penned politician-passed House or Senate resolutions. By passing the resolution, Congress will be attempting to determine by legislation which side of a historical question is correct. Such a resolution, based on historically questionable assumptions, can only damage the cause of honest historical inquiry and damage the credibility of the American legislative process. The archives in Turkey are open since 1980s, and the scholars from more than 100 countries already studied them. Armenian archives, on the other hand, are still closed today. So what are the Armenians hiding? What are they afraid of? Perhaps we will find the smoking guns of Armenian war crimes and hate crimes. That makes sense, considering 160 years history of Armenian terrorism. How does all this play on the youth of America? Let me answer that by quoting a letter from an 8th grader in California back in 2016. She asked a few questions for a school project, and I responded promptly. This exchange is revealing, educational, and thought-provoking. I think every K-12 and college student faced with similar history projects can benefit from this exchange. But unfortunately, we ran out of time. I will share that exchange with you in the next episode. Thank you for joining me. See you next week.